Just
Yeah.
find it. 1 second. Okay.
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 Let's do this.
I'm at your service now. You can hear me well. You can see me well, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
All right. So, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in our 11th session of this year's Indelible Evening Series. For those of you who don't know me, I am Lula Maria Deeb, editor of Indelible, the literary journal of AUD, the American University in Dubai. I'd like to take a little moment for a bit of housekeeping first. First of all, please make sure to keep your mics muted during the talk in order to avoid any interfering background noise. And please save questions until the Q&A after the talk. You may either type your questions into the chat box or alternatively use the raise hand function by clicking on the participant button available, at which point we may invite you to unmute your microphone in order to ask your question, should you wish so. I am greatly delighted to welcome tonight's featured author and poet, Dr. Hanna Saadah. So, who says that art and science are two separate fields by nature, rather than two complementary but different sides of the same coin? Or that medical researchers take interest only in matters within the boundaries of the laboratory and hospital? For poets, there are no boundaries, for there is poetic wisdom in scientific knowledge, beauty in anatomy, and conquests worth celebrating in verse. And for biographers and memoirists, the medical humanities offers experiences that are later on preserved in prose. Our guest tonight is very special. He deconstructs this divide between two seemingly distinct disciplines, building bridges instead of boundaries, and showing us the importance of contemplating, cherishing, and preserving the beauty of what we learn and experience. We are very lucky and honored to have him share excerpts from his creative works with us. Dr. Hanna Saadah, MD, is both a creative writer and an infectious disease specialist in Oklahoma City. He traveled to the US in 1971 for completing his postgraduate medical training. The 20-year Lebanese Civil War prevented him from returning to his fatherland, thus making Oklahoma his second home, where he has been productive as both physician and writer. Dr. Saadah has authored 5 poetry books, 4 novels, and a collection of short stories. Dr. Saadah, do you mind if we start with a question first?
Not at all. Please
All
do.
right. So you've taught ethics and humanities. You write poetry, you write novels and stories. You are a medical practitioner, researcher, and professor. How hand in hand do you find the two fields of medicine or science and literature or the humanities to be? Do you find the link in them to come as naturally as it comes for you, or does someone need to look closely enough in order to get there?
I think they feed into each other. They come to me as natural. But this question is a common question. About 150 years ago, a Russian reporter asked Chekhov, a Russian writer who's also a physician. She says, "How do you reconcile medicine and writing?" He says, "Medicine is my lawful wedded wife, and writing is my mistress. When I get tired of one, I spend the night with the other." So I think I'm the same way, you know. When I get tired of medicine, my refuge is literature.
That's a very interesting analogy. And I would also like to ask, with given the certain, the current situation, the current pandemic, it has created unprecedented scenes and situations in the medical world, in hospitals, at homes. Do you think that it has also impacted your creative writing or creative writing in general? So does it have the same impact that it had on medicine in creative writing?
I think when you're stressed or strained, you write more and you write better. I think if everything is going perfectly well, you tend to write less. So I find I've been very productive this past year. I've written almost 1 or 2 pieces a month and put them in the Oklahoma Journal. So it has impacted me in that I feel I need to contribute something beyond the physical world, which is soothing for people to read.
So it's had a positive impact on your writing in general.
Right. You know, Paul Valéry, the famous French philosopher, he says, Une difficulté est une lumière. Une difficulté insurmontable est un soleil. A difficulty is a lamp. An unsurmountable difficulty is a sun. We tend to perform better when we are in difficult times.
Yes, I agree. I can actually relate to that. I mean, we've heard many writers say the same thing. Not only are they having more time to write, but they're having more feelings, stronger feelings toward what is going on around them. We have, this is a time in history that every generation who is alive right now has probably not seen anything like it before. So, would you like to start with your short stories, or would you like to start with excerpts from your poems?
I'd like to start with a short story because it's poignant, and
Okay,
because we're the older generation and we are having to deal with aging and with sickness and with loss of friends. And this year and last year, I've lost many friends that I used to play with. So this story is poignant. You could flash it on the screen for people to follow if you like.
sure.
It's it's called Homo Senex. They play on words because Senex means old, and instead of Homo sapiens, the wise man, Homo Senex is the old man. And I'm just going to read from my book and Veteran Elder Stories. You can follow me, Rula.
All right, sure.
Okay. Uh, at student gatherings, his name, like the Concorde, would land and take off at supersonic speeds, for he was both feared and revered, not loved but respected, not affable but accessible, not arrogant but humbling, not a good lecturer but captivating, and not affectionate but a mighty healer. We all wanted to be like him, but were afraid to become him. And although he never tried to intimidate us with his vast repertoire of knowledge, we could not help but feel intimidated because of the steep cliff between his lighthouse mind and our book mired brains. That was how we felt about Dr. Kingley when we graduated from our medical school nest and flew away to build our own nests in the sundry corners of Earth. Isn't it preposterous that whereas distance and time bury memory, death resurrects it? I had forgotten all about Dr. Kingley until 40 years later when I saw his young, handsome photograph hanging above his obituary. That was when my memories welled up like tears and to life, brought him back to life. Why is it that we fondly remember those who had influenced us, only, mostly when we learn of their deaths? It was my habit each time I visited my fatherland, Lebanon, to promenade up and down my alma mater campus, which, like an embroidered tapestry, draped the slope from the crown of Beirut down to the Mediterranean Sea. It was during one of those nostalgic visits to the American University of Beirut that I spotted Dr. Kingley with his silver topped cane and silver head sitting on a solitary bench gazing at the sea. I approached and from a reverent distance greeted. Good morning, Dr. Kingley. Awakened from his reverie, he peered at me with gleeful eyes, twice smiled my name, and inquired, where have you been all these years? In Oklahoma, sir. Come then, sit next to me and tell me all about you. Invitingly, he tapped the bench with his elegant cane, and I obeyed, sitting down with knees locked and arms in lap. After an awkward stretch of quietude, I briefly related my life story. He nodded approvingly, as if I were one of his ambassadors to the world. Then, with a sigh of silence, I politely reciprocated. How about you, sir? Well and content, I hope? Well, yes, but content, no. How come, sir? No memory of having starred atones for later disregard, or keeps the end from being hard, said your Robert Frost. That's doleful, sir. What happened? After a lifetime of loyalty to this institution, I'm still heartbroken at its disloyalty to me. It is the fashion that discarded fathers should have thus little mercy on their flesh, said King Lear. He intoned. Gratitude may be a virtue of individuals, but not of institutions. I am astonished, sir, you embodied this institution, and to many of us, you were the institution. Whatever went wrong? Nothing went wrong. I lost my powers to age, and we all do. And when I became powerless, I also became worthless. This is the state of man. Today he puts forth the tender leaves of hope. Tomorrow blossoms and bears his blushing honors thick upon him. The third day comes a frost, a killing frost, and when he, when he falls as I do. I am not but a childless widower, aging alone. With my head bowed under the heft of his words, I sank into an echoing well of reflection and waited. I never thought I would quote from Woosley's Farewell to His Greatness, but these lines often seem to find their way into my memory, he resumed after an awkward pause. Shakespeare gives me solace, and I read him often. Now that I dwell in the twilight of my 80s, he is my only remaining friend. But let us leave our melancholy to wallow alone in the mire of memories, and let us redirect our conversation toward joy. Tell me about the Oklahoma people. Have your patients been as loyal to you as you have been to them? My patients are my family, sir, but ingratitude that gives birth to lawsuits is ever present in our medical wombs. That's one problem we don't have here, but we do have others that are far worse. There are no perfect countries on earth, and no matter where we choose to live, we must live in our times. What are your thoughts about early retirement, sir? I asked, redirecting the conversation. I often consider it when bureaucracy becomes unbearably burdensome. Ah, the laws delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, he chided. You're still too young to resort to retirement as a refugee from bureaucratic ills. Just wait, and retirement will come to you one day, as it did to me. But you must be prepared, otherwise, it will diminish you. Age takes hold of us by surprise, said Goethe. Oh, how smug, how unprepared, and how unaware I was when age surprised me. I nodded, but more out of politeness than conviction. He was trying to instruct me using Hamlet's words that one must not shy away from struggle, but instead, one must prepare for it. When he sensed my uncertainty, his eyes beamed with tenderness. Then, as if he could hear my thoughts, he added, who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. I understand your meaning, sir, but as I get older, struggle becomes more difficult and surrender more appealing. He nodded disapprovingly and took a sudden turn. Do you ever think about old age? He whispered. I think about death, sir. But do you think about old age? He persisted. I'm afraid not, sir. It seems too distant to be real. Indeed, he beat the ground with his cane. Youth is taught about life, about disease, and about death, but never about old age. We grow up thinking that old Homo sapiens are a different species, a Homo senex, perhaps. In medical school, we should be taught more about aging so it will become real to us and so that we can better prepare for it. Nothing surprises us when we are prepared. It is the surprise that bites. In a quiet moment of contemplation, I gazed at the sea's whispering waves and at the unsurprised horizon preparing to cradle the sun. What's the first thing you see in very old people? He queried, cracking my reverie. Frailty, slowness, loss of form, loss of elegance, loss of beauty, and loss of appeal, I replied. And what's the first emotion you experience? Pity, sadness, and at times revulsion. You prove my point. You have not been taught a thing about aging. If you had, you would have better answers because you would view the Homo senex differently. How do you mean, sir? Your eyes should be trained to see the old when they were young and beautiful rather than old and pitiful. Go ahead, look at me now and try to see me as once I was, a young, handsome medical student. Can you do that in your mind's eye? Can you reconstruct the bright young man out of this old relic? It's hard, sir, I confessed. That's why we need to train medical students in the art of reconstruction and reperception. And how do we do that, sir? When you return to your medical work in Oklahoma, start by having your very old patients bring their wedding pictures to their appointments. Study their young pictures before you study their charts. Ask them about their diseases, about their chronic disorders. Address the young person lurking inside of them before you address the old person they evince, and you will quickly discover that very young souls are still frolicking inside their old, frail bodies. Has this method ever been tried, sir? No, but why can't you be the first to try it? The tragedy of aging is not that one is old, but that one is young, said Oscar Wilde. Is that really true, sir? Indeed, inside of me lurks a very young man, ready to devour life, but my old body censors it. Oh, how rejuvenated I would feel if I were to be reperceived as young. Then, with brimming eyes, he turned his head away and asked, are you familiar with the work of Beauvoir? No, sir. Who's he? Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre's lifelong companion, wrote decisively about aging, but her work languishes in unread books. She made two discoveries which, if heeded, would brighten the tenebrous ancienthood of the Homo senex. What did she discover, sir? Her first discovery was that we do not experience old age from within, but from without, because society sees old age as a shameful secret that is too unseemly to mention. Old age is not discovered, It is imposed from the outside, she contends. Why isn't she recognized for this amazing discovery, sir? Because she admonishes us to spend more time saving people from old age than we spend saving them from death. Medically, we are trained to fight death, not to fight age, and that's a major flaw. What was her second discovery, sir? That old age, rather than death, is what should be contrasted with life, because old age is life's parody, whereas death transforms life into a destiny, preserving it by giving it the absolute dimension. Death does away with time, she contends. He discoursed profusely about revitalizing old age by bringing its inner youth to the forefront. We need to dethrone the dethroned King Lear in us and leave the affairs of the state to the younger progeny, he announced, holding his staff erect as if it were a scepter. When it was time to leave, I offered to walk him home. No, thank you, he demurred. I am awaiting the sunset. That's my way of readying myself for the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. I do not wish to be surprised again. In flight on my way back to Oklahoma, the similarity between discarded batteries, which had suffused the world with light, and the very old among us who had infused the world with life, helped me understand Simone de Beauvoir's view of death as the absolute dimension that grant us our destinies. My chance encounter with Dr. Kingley forever transformed me. Indeed, Ralph Waldo Emerson was correct when he said, the chief event of life is the day in which we have encountered a mind that startled us.
Thank you
Thank,
so much, Dr.
thank you.
Saadah, for sharing this. Indeed, as you said, it is very, very poignant. And what I especially liked about it is how, in the end, it was old age that should be contrasted with life rather than death. So that was, I mean, for me, that was one of the deepest sentences in the story. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Well,
And you would like to move on to the poetry now, right? Or is there anything else that you would like to say or
no,
read?
I would like to just introduce poetry with some remarks that I have accrued over my long life. I'm 75 years old, so I've had time to absorb enough of life to understand poetry. And the 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 question is why poetry? What's so what's so different about poetry? And in the 80s, our hometown Amyun in Lebanon in the Lebanese mountains was invaded by upper mountaineers, and the inhabitants of Amyun ran away, became refugees in Tripoli. Many of them landed in our home in Tripoli. We have a home in Tripoli also. And my mother wrote me this letter. She says, we have lost everything, everything. Our homes, our dignity, our olive trees, our bank accounts, our money, our health. The only thing we have left is poetry. And that struck me as so true because I think poetry is my refuge. When I don't know what to do, I end up in poetry. And so I have collected a potpourri of poems that I have written. None of them is a complete poem because it gets to be boring, but they're just snippets to give you an idea about how my mind, my soul searches for meaning in life through poetry. And the first one I want to read is not mine, it's by Alfred Lord Tennyson, and which I use sometimes with students. And I ask them, can you describe an eagle? And Of course, I get the usual descriptions: big wings, fast, glamorous, sharp beak, etc., etc., etc. But then I said, this is how a poet describes the eagle. The poet says, he clasps the crag with crooked hands. Notice the alliterative, C, C, C. He clasps the crag with crooked hands. Close to the sun in lonely lands, another alliterative, lonely lands. Ringed by the azure world, he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt, he falls. When you read that, the eagle comes to life. It's not anymore a bird. It's not anymore a beautiful image. It's a something living. This is what poetry does. Instead of saying this is a beautiful eagle, you say these 6 lines and the eagle comes to life. Now, I want to read some snippets from my own verse. These snippets come from my first book, Loves and Lamentations of a Life Watcher. Now, this is a story about a man who was madly in love with a woman, and she became his life, his entire life. And we don't know what happened, but that relationship broke. He became so disillusioned and so sad that he became recluse, went to the mountains, found himself a little lodge, and lived alone for several years. And suddenly he gets a letter from his beloved, whom he had not heard from or seen for many years, asking if she could come and visit him. And this is how he answered her. He is describing his situation, and this is his answer. The snowflakes tremble in the dimming light, and it is cold and sad and very white. A melancholy stillness lulls the wind to sleep and bids the setting sun good night. With memories, a little wine and fate, on winter nights like these, I hibernate, away from man, my loneliness and I, where peace is vast like death and intimate. I saved my sweetest dreams for you before, but since you left, somehow I dream no more. Instead, I die each night, then resurrect, and work by day in order to forget. I placed my life in savings at the bank. I spend it wisely, and I always thank my banker, though he gives no interest, nor does he tell me how long I have left. How much I hunger for your love and yearn, ignite you in my bed and with you burn. But then I fear the shattering of dreams upon a fossil past that can't return. So stay away. I need my memories of all the lusty wine and dusty cheese that still I taste upon your gasping lips on cold and lonesome winter nights like these. The answer is I don't want anything to destroy my memories, and nobody can go back into the future. Uh,
So
the second,
is the poem based on a true story?
um, when I write, uh, when I write, I collect from my unconscious, all kinds of images, and I
Mhm.
weave it into a story. And every part of the story is correct, except it's has been uh, quilted together from many experiences.
Mhm.
Um, but everything you write ultimately is personal. Like Dostoevsky says, he says we have to use fiction to tell the truth.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So now I'm trying to capture emotions as somebody who likes poetry. Emotions are the fuel of poetry, and this emotion is when you're saying goodbye forever. Now, this poem I wrote for my mentor, Dr. Everett Rhodes, when he was my infectious disease mentor. When he left and became the chief of the Indian Health Service in Washington, we knew we were never going to see each other again. So I took two excerpts from that poem of How Do You Say Goodbye? And if we say goodbye, who would supply the spirit here, the conflict and the magic and the fear, and every now and then a cold and frothy beer? And if we say goodbye, who then would suture time together every year? Let us wander to the tavern at the corner of the street, share a jug of frothy spirit, something warm to eat. Watch the many faces of a lazy afternoon exit together in the dimming light, and then, pretending we shall be together soon, depart on separate ways into the night. I have said this kind of goodbye to so many of my friends because in Lebanon, the diaspora is continuous and people leave to Australia, to Canada, to Africa, to you never see them again. So that was a goodbye poem. It's the emotion of the goodbye, which I'm sure all of us have experienced. The third emotion is the emotion of when you love someone, you don't want them to leave you. You love them so much, you just couldn't stand life without them, and you want to tell them, "Don't leave me," but you want to say it in a more powerful way than "Don't leave me," because that would not be poetry. So this is an excerpt from a poem called "Cling to Me." You are my sweetest thoughts, unleashed in playful mood. My truth, elusive, solid, undisturbed, unwooed. My sense of beauty as it blends with nature's art. Ah, we are one in mind and soul and heart. So cling to me like I must cling to truth, or like when we are old, we cling to youth. Come, harvest of my dreams, come bountiful and free, and cling to me with drowning arms. Oh, cling to me. There's no better clinging when somebody is drowning and they put their arms around you. And that was the image I used to say, please don't leave me. This one comes from a poem called The Fool, and it expresses my worry about the human race because I can sense the planet is getting crowded and polluted and unhealthy for many people. There is a lot of poverty, and you know, you feel the pain of others, even though you happen to live in a great country. And this excerpt expresses that emotion of worry about the planet. Sometimes I wonder, will the Homo sapiens brute decline, destruct, or evolute into a nobler institute than we, where love might be a little less dilute, and where there is a place for fools like me, fools who are simple, nonetheless diverse, who, with compassion for their universe, reach out to mend the future with a verse, untouched by fashioned thoughts or views, inclined to meditate and muse, who seldom read the press or watch the news. So, in my sentiments, I want to correct the future with a verse, with my poetry, because I feel the pain of the future. Uh, this one, it's called Little Man. It talks about the frightening absence of love. I wrote this to my little son when he was a few years old. And this excerpt from it basically shows the terror that we feel when we don't have love. In the Brothers Karamazov, a famous novel by Dostoevsky, one of the brothers goes to the elder Zosima, who's on his deathbed. He's a very holy man. He says, Father Zosima, where is heaven? And Father Zosima says, heaven is in every one of us, son, waiting to be reached. Then he says, well, where is hell then? He says, hell is the suffering of being no longer able to love. Well, this poem kind of says something similar. Yes, I have been to many places, all the same, and watched the empty faces fade, heard the lonely chattering of slippy dentures, and the eerie whistling of the hearing aid. And yes, at times became dismayed, but never lost my faith, except when love was absent. Then I was afraid. Now, everybody who's loved knows that love hurts, and and uh, it it hurts, and it changes us. One time I wrote this verse, which is not here, and it says, yes, I am well aware that nothing lasts beyond the moment's edge, that love at first will crawl, then springs like roses marvelous and tall, then browns, and all the petals fall and scatter through the air. Only the thorns remain on branches, pleading, bare, with every thorn a pain. Yes, I am well aware. But we love anyway. And this is about love often hurts. It comes from a sonnet. How I have loved you all my life, and yet 'twas only yesterday that we had met. My only fear is losing you, and all the wasted years apart, my one regret. Like waves that ever seek the ocean wall, I tire not in loving you at all. And verses dormant deep within my soul spring to my lips to bloom upon your call. Love often hurts. Pray do not let the pain go deep to shake our clinging roots again. The rose of love, she blows in tempest climes, yet buds return, the fruits and stems remain. It's the ever hopeful impulse in us to keep love ablaze because it gives us meaning. Now, with love, there's confusion, and your mind plays tricks on you, and you make decisions that are sometimes not very good. And this poem comes from the confusion of love. And a little snippet. I do not trust my mind. It tortures and it teases and wonders where it pleases, leaving me behind. I do not trust my mind. Sometimes you sparkle like the evening gold, magnificent, unreachable, and cold. And then you soften with a mellowed sigh, nestle on my chest, and with me lie. My poise and posture abdicate upon your sight, and reason dies behind, and man becomes a heedless child whose love is of a different kind. I only trust my heart when I am with you. I do not trust my mind. We've all experienced reunion after time and distance when you've been gone from your lover so long and then you can't wait to see her. And finally, the moment comes and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, oh my God, I don't look as handsome. I don't look as young. I don't look as proper. My hair is not right. And you worry about your appearance. And this is an emotion of someone who's coming to see his loved one after being separated for years, and he's worried that she will not see him like the young man he was. It's from a poem called Apart. And when we will remember and embrace, do not look too close upon my face. After all the distance and the time, there are years and stories I cannot erase, and tired looks no longer in their prime. It is sad that when we see people we have not seen for 40 years, their image of us is when we're young, and then they look at us and they say, oh my God, what happened to you? Well, the 40 years happened. This comes from a poem called Lady in Black. It's about wishing wisdom for youth, which is really not possible because youth are programmed to be passionate and rebellious and adventurous, and wisdom usually does not accompany these emotions. And the English word sophomore, when you're in college and you're a sophomore, it literally means, it comes from Greek. Soph means wise, Sophia is wisdom, and mor means moron. So you're a wise moron when you're a sophomore. We all are wise morons when we are sophomores. And this is how a young man feels. If I can be young and wise, strong enough to compromise, hold you tight throughout the night, let you fly at break of light, feel you more when out of sight, watch you venture and create, learn to live and liberate. Don't possess your loved ones, but young people do. They want total possession. Now, this poem is about how love can laugh at life. Love is very powerful. It can laugh at anything, especially at life. And this comes from a poem called Love Story. Life is a chain of moods and states of mind, a churning sea of feelings, changing, blind, and you, the passion of my churning sea, the warming pulse of life that pounds in me. So let us go life watching, you and I, and paint the moon and stars upon the sky, then sprinkle madness on the peppered night, and laugh at life, its luster and its plight. Love solves many things by laughing at them. Uh, Everyone has heard the Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. It was written for Contessa Giulietta Guglielmo that Beethoven taught piano lessons to, and he was taken with her. She was very beautiful. And I took that sonata and divided it into pieces and took some excerpt about how does Beethoven, who's an old deaf musician, feel about this very young and beautiful girl sitting next to him, learning from him. And he's enchanted, but he's also wise. Madam dear, every time you hover near, sailing like a summer dream, it would seem that a spring is blowing here, Madam dear. Madam, how should I begin? Is it madness or your skin that makes me contemplate and sin? The way it waves about your hips, then rising higher swells and dips, and buds, then blossoms on your lips, or winks and dimples at your chin, and whispers where some locks of hair curl and snuggle round your ear, must be madness, Madam dear. Madam, soon the sun will swoon, and we will watch the moon. It laughs and paces and changes faces, a bit entranced, no doubt, like you and I, outlaying hide and seek in our sky. If only we could learn to live like this, with little madness from the lunar bliss, your liquid skin reflecting like a lake upon my senses ere the dawn will break and shake us back into the haunting light. Come, let us venture through the golden night. There is a dream to capture and a fate. Dreams come but for a while and never wait. I don't know if Beethoven had these feelings, but I would say it would be natural to feel attracted to somebody so beautiful and so young when you're on the other side of life.
Beautiful poem. You could actually hear the resonance of the Moonlight Sonata. So it's really beautiful.
Thank you. Now, we all have mothers, and one time my mother told me, she says, "You write poetry about everything and to everyone. You've never written a poem for your mother." I said, "Oh, touche, Mom." And so I wrote a poem and gave it to her as a present for Christmas. And this is the last stanza from that long poem. Mother dear, oh, mother dear, the certainties in life are only three: death and change and all your love for me. Death will come, I do not fear, and change and age are always here. But oh, without your love, what would I be? Uh, this poem is called The Pond. It's a critique of human nature that we live in a pond and we eat on each other and we fight each other and we have periods of struggle, and then we have periods of peace. And I'm talking to my loved one. I'm saying I'm in the pond, but I'm coming out of the pond. I want to come back to serene life. Prepare your face with smiles and eager eyes. Prepare your cheeks to rise like bread. I love them warm and red. Prepare your skin to spread like spring upon your hills and valleys. Anoint with milk and wine your half-lit alleys, every shrine and dome. It's worship time. I'm coming home. I'm coming home to love you slow. Time is short and rare. I'll touch you gently till you glow and frolic with your hair. Kiss your gardens till the dew pearls with beads of sweat, and gloat upon you, ripe and wet, in perfect bloom, and not consume, but sip you slow, like holy wine, to last and last. At shrines as yours, one must not worship fast. You could tell the agony of coming back from the pond to someone who is lovely and loving. Now, this is about how love defies age. It comes from a poem, A Dying Man's Song to His Lady. They have been together for 50 years and he's dying and he doesn't want to leave his woman. And he has something to say to her, even though his body is fading, his mind is alert. He says, he calls her his butterfly. He says, behold, my butterfly, behold, how silver took the place of gold, how cherries red and ripe with years fell off the lips and cheeks like tears. Look how the skin is quick to scold, the hair is sparse, the head is bald, the eyes have lost their glittering, the legs are weak and quivering, with arms that reach to grasp and hold, no longer deft, no longer bold, uncertain, slow and stooped with fear, and growing shorter every year. The senses dull and dim and cold. The mind is young, the rest is old, and death invites, but life delays, and silence dominates the days. The nights are short, the tales are told. Behold, my butterfly, behold. And though I have been cooked by years and sun, and all my tales are told, and deeds are done, I look at you, and still I flit and fly, for you will always be my butterfly, and I will dance to music of your form, and in you find my quietude and storm. Love does not die in people when they age together. It actually becomes more mature. Now, this poem is a lamentation on the loss of intimacy. When you are intimate with someone, and then you get used to each other, and then all of a sudden, intimacy is lost, and you're lamenting, what happened to us? We used to be passionate lovers. Why aren't we anymore? And it's called The Spoons. Alone tonight, I meditate and write about the spoons. How perfectly they lie together like a pair of moons. In quietude, they glow and meet, exchanging soul and heat and moistened tunes. I wonder why no longer you and I together lie like spoons. It's the sad loss of intimacy. This poem comes from a sonnet called Morning Love, and it basically depicts love as a morning. Love is the morning of relationships. I watch the birth far at the edge of earth, a gladdened shimmering without a cry, and then the flapping golden clouds of mirth before the fireball redeems the sky. At splendid morns like these, I find your eyes in quiet clouds that lash upon the skies, in vast awakenings that reunite the depth of darkness and the laughs of light. This poem I wrote to my little son, Ferris. It's a sonnet, It's about the reversal of father and son. When we get older, our children become our parents and we become children. And it says it in a very kind way, because he used to spend a lot of time upon my knees. My little one, how oft upon my knees you took to saddle with adoring ease. I'd scratch your back, you'd munch, then hop away. Your needs were met of love and food and play. When you become a man and I a child, you'll come to take me for a Sunday ride, a filial payment on paternal fees for all the rides you took upon my knees. This last section comes from my third book, Familiar Faces, and it's about the disillusionment of lovers when they cannot marry or get together because things happen in life that prevent you from finding your mate. It could be family interference, it could be social interference, it could be illness, death. And this, it's about the impediments of love. It's called Making Roses, which you can understand the symbolism, making roses, making a family, making a life, making children. Somehow I know that you and I will not make roses, though if we could, they would be beautiful, yellow, red, and pink. Oh, how it pains to think that you and I, because of certain thorny causes, could not make roses. Now, we've all had our first kiss, and I was trying to capture the emotions of my first kiss. And I could relive it. And this is what came to my mind. That rain gladdened hour, with you moist and perfect, like a morning flower. Your lips, petals with dew, in silence cleave and cry. I sigh, then gather you and taste the sky. We all live in a life where repetition is the rule. Everything repeats if you think about it. And this is my understanding of life's repetition. It's called repetition. I would repeat my utterings if I could find an ear. Don't we all repeat ourselves for someone else to hear? My heart repeats its beats, and every song repeats. And all who pray and preach, and all who learn and teach, and all who stand in speech, and all who love and breach, and every smile and tear that captures and entreats in all the atmosphere repeats, repeats, repeats. This is comes from a poem called Adherent September. It's about the man and the woman. The woman is worrying about what if it doesn't last? What if we get divorced? What if it doesn't work? What if, what if, what if, what if? And the man is trying to respond by saying, look, we're missing the moments because we're worrying about something totally out of our control that we cannot even foresee. And this happened in September. So it's adieu in September. And the man is talking to the woman. Do not worry. Everything is temporary. Everything. The kiss of youth, the love we sing, the tidy truth, the landscape smile, the many times that you and I postponed the sunset for a while, everything that life can bring, every fall and every spring, all is always momentary. Do not worry. It will not happen soon. Though I have gulped my morning, I will slowly sip my afternoon. Keep the sun afloat upon the edge of one remaining day. Hide a little time away underneath your dress where we can play together and confess. It will not happen soon. I am primitive like trees, and I have seasons. I love you with my instincts and my milky ways. I give no reasons. I am the bee that sips and pollinates your lips. I drone around your neck, slowly up and down, until your blossoms leap. Then I drink and drown. It's a living the moment rather than worrying about the future. And coincidence is a life shaper. If you think about it, everything we are is a series of coincidences. The fact that our parents met on this day, the fact that we live in this country, the fact that our grandparents met on this day, and you can go back until the beginning of humanity. And this is what I concede of coincidence because it's a very powerful mover of life. Coincidence. She wears green shadows intertwined with dreams, lurks unforeseen in silence, plots, and schemes. At times, she hurries matters to profound extremes, delights in rolling fortunes in reverse. Coincidence. She sways the universe. And this is the last, I think, the last excerpt. No, one more time. This is about where do we end? You know, we live our lives and then where do we end? Where do we want to settle down and finish our lives and die? Very simple. Familiar faces, let us not pretend, though life may decimate and send our unsuspecting soul across uncharted times and unfamiliar places. Wherever we are loved, we end. We trickle back to where people love us. And this is the last excerpt. It's from a letter from Beirut, a poem I wrote on my way back from Beirut. Uh, I had an identity crisis. I came here to train and go back to Lebanon to serve, and the civil war broke out. I couldn't go back. And 20 years later, when I tried to go back, I didn't belong. And everybody was still trying to leave, and they would look at me and say, why are you coming back? We're all trying to leave. And this is identity crisis. It's expressed in this very simple stanza. Because I have two hearts, because I straddle oceans, because I am both banks of life, the froth, the currents in between, the dissonant emotions. I see beyond the mighty walls of time, beyond the eyes, the made up lips and faces, beyond the borrowed sentiments and faint laces, because I have two hearts. My soul is vagabond, it camps in many places. Thank you for listening. It was a kind of a very heartwarming encounter, and I'm ready to say anything, talk to you at any level that you like.
Thank you so much. Your poems are full of many kinds of love: romantic love, maternal love, paternal love, the absence of love. So, I noticed that this is perhaps the strongest theme or the most common theme in your poetry.
It's correct. It's correct. I tend to, I don't write other kinds of poetry. I only write if I have an emotion, and if you have an emotion, there's always some love or disillusionment in it, or fear, and it just if I have no emotions, I can't write.
That's true. And there's no stronger emotion than love,
Yeah.
right? So you have so many, so many comments here in the box that you might like to have a look at. I will now open the floor to questions. So if anyone has a question for Dr. Hanna, please go ahead. You could use the raise hand button so I can see you, or you can just use the chat box. Okay, we have a question here by Ahmed Sharafuddin. So emotion, is what inspires you to write? I mean, how your ideas come to life. So I believe the question is, emotions are what bring your poems to life. If that's the question. Okay, there's a question mark, so I guess that's it.
Okay, of course, every writer is different. My own mind works like this. I have an emotion, and in order to deal with my emotion, I have to express it in writing. That's how I am constituted. And the emotion starts to work on me through writing. I start my brain, even when I'm asleep or awake, it's starting to try to find a title or the first line. And then once I find the skeleton of the poem, I end up dedicating more time to it. Uh, it's one of those strange gifts because I'm not gifted in music or in painting or in sports or in politics or anything else, but God gave me a gift of writing, and I can write what I feel, and I can say it in a way that other people can feel it. It's in Shakespeare in Measure for Measure. It says ourselves and our belongings meaning gifts. Ourselves and our belongings are not uh, our own. They are the gifts of life, and we should not waste them, because if we do, it is as if we do not have them.
Right, absolutely. You know how there is a reputation that doctors become more callous with time. They become less emotional. Do you, I mean, do you connect with this, or do you see it happening, or is it's like a false claim about doctors?
I work with medical students a lot, and I use these stories and some of the poetry to kindle their emotional beings, the humanities in them. And I think we start life by being very idealistic, very emotional, very dedicated. But I think when the business of medicine and the bureaucracy of medicine and the lawsuits of medicine start to come to us and nibble on us, we start
Hmm.
to become defensive. I don't think we lose anything, but we become more and more cautious and more defensive. And I hear things such as, well, you don't want to become liable by doing this. It may be the best thing you can do for this person, but you need to think of liability because somebody might sue you. So it does change the thinking and the emotion as we get deeper and deeper into the medical life, which is unfortunate. It's a social pressure
Uh-huh.
rather than an actually human pressure.
Hmm.
Uh, um, I don't know that it's going to go away. It's still there.
Okay. So it's like, for example, things like death or tragedy, because of medical reasons, it would still move a doctor, even though the doctor would see a lot of it, even though the doctor would be expecting it. Or do you feel that, it's like the nature of the emotional reaction towards things like this would change with time because of a profession like being a medical doctor?
I don't think it changed. I think you are who you are,
Uh-huh.
and I think your conscience, your emotional being, is alive and well in you. And I think you suffer with your suffering patients, and you suffer when you can't help them, and you rejoice when you help them, and they become your family and your friends, and sometimes you stay in contact with them for years and years.
Uh-huh.
But there's also this. tendency to try to protect yourself from having too much emotion, because sometimes it can cloud your thinking, or it can actually affect your family life or your relationship. So it's a finding a balance, or finding a golden mean. But most people find it. I think most doctors that I know are very caring, but they're also very circumspect, or have become very circumspect, and they're also very careful because society applies legal pressures on them, and bureaucratic pressures that they can't avoid.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. We have an interesting question by Carla Isa. Carla asks, in a world that is increasingly hypermasculine, where men are taught through media, through society to suppress their emotions, how do you break away from that? What do you attribute as the biggest enabler of this form of emotional expression? What advice can you give to young male poets? That's a very interesting question.
I still cry at movies, or if I read something. I don't want to suppress my emotion. It is who I am. And maybe some people don't have as much uh, emotional reserve, or maybe because we come from the East, we are very emotional people. But I think it is wrong to suppress emotion, because emotion ultimately is a good leader for you on how to behave, and how to think, and how to empathize, and how to understand the pain of others. And the great doctor William Osler, he says, the good doctor treats the disease. The great doctor treats the patient who has the disease. The emphasis is on the patient, and the same is true for many things. I think as a poet, you have to be courageous. You just have to speak up, put your emotion online, and you can do it in such a way not to be offensive. Uh, but I could not survive without emotion. I mean, I would be sterile almost.
Mhm.
So yeah, my advice is cling to your emotion and use it to your best, because it is really your guiding light.
That's a very good piece of advice for any young male poets who are here today with us in the audience. We also have a question from Dr. Lulu Malab. Dr. Lulu asks, thank you for such an inspiring evening and memorable words. Do you think that the short story Homo Senex is a way of reconciling medicine and literature?
That's what I use it for. I have medical students rotating through our department, and we every day we read a short story, and the short story always has a humanitarian message, and it's always a medical short story like this one. And we also discuss it, because the humanities now are emphasized in medical school, and there is regret that we admitted medical students who had high grades in the sciences in pre-medical studies, and not students who had high grades in the humanities. And now the reverse is true. If you have a a BA in English literature or in the classics, you are much more prone to get admitted to medical school, because they have found out if you don't have your humanities, you will use your humanism. And so, yes, I use short stories to emphasize the humanities. And deep inside, we are all storytellers, and we all love stories. Nassim Talib, in his book The Black Swan, he says, ideas come and go, stories stay. It's hard to forget a story, but I forget many ideas every day. So, yes, I think stories are a very powerful way of delivering a message that could be hard to deliver if you write an essay, for example.
That is wonderful to hear that you are integrating literature, within the curriculum, within the teaching curriculum of the medical sciences. We have a question. According to writing, do you read only the real stories? This is a question by Maram Muhammad. So, do you read only the real stories? You mean biographical stories, probably, or creative nonfiction?
I read, I usually read fiction because really, if you want to know the truth about things, it is all in the fiction. People tell the truth through fiction much more than they tell the truth through writing an autobiography because it's embellished and changed. But fiction, you can do what you want, and you ultimately you're talking from your own soul, and you're characterizing people to say things that you once said. So I think fiction is how we tell the truth.
Yes, absolutely. We have a comment from Dr. Gail Hamill. Dr. Gail says, I would say, look at the men you know and love, not the images in the media. So perhaps, Dr. Gail, you're referring to the stereotype, to this the stereotypical hard and callous and unemotional male, right? Did I get that?
The the media are part of life, meaning they're undeniable. They're like bad weather or drought or storms or tornadoes or tsunamis. They're there, and I don't think they do a lot of good, and they also do a lot of harm. And you you have to be like a filter. You have to know what to believe, what not to believe, and you really don't want the media to program your brain. You want to program your own brain by doing your own readings and just absorbing everything in the media as your main source of information kind of manufactures you into a robot. You just become a programmed human being, programmed of his time, rather than you've taken part in your own programming and you've read and lightened yourself by seeking all these great works that are already written. So I don't watch the news. I don't really watch the media. I don't think I know how to turn on the television. If my wife did not turn it on, I would not know. We sometimes watch a movie, but uh, I, if I have time, I want to read. I don't want to watch anyone. So, my caution is don't let the media program your brain. It's not a good idea. And the old adage, if there's an untruth which is repeatedly repeated for a long time, it becomes a truth.
Mhm.
And it was started as an untruth, and that's happens to all of us. So we have to be careful.
Right. That's a very good piece of advice. We have another question now, a question from Huda Yunus. Huda asks, thank you for sharing with us your amazing work. Have you ever had a writer's block due to the social and legal pressures you face from work? And if so, what helps you to get back to writing? Friends, families, patients, maybe an inspiring place?
Uh, I'm not a professional writer, I'm an amateur, which means a lover of writing. And so when I have an emotion, I write. If I don't have an emotion, I don't have commission. Nobody says you have to submit something on this date. So I don't feel the pressure to write when I don't have the emotion. But living in today's life, there are emotions floating everywhere and you can capture them and capitalize on them. So I don't think I've ever had a writer's block because I don't have to submit a work at a certain time for any reason. And I don't embark on a work because I need to write. It's the emotion is there and it's probing me, and I submit and I start writing. It's a little different because I'm an amateur writer. I'm not a professional writer.
So the writing comes from within. It's not a decision that you would want to sit and write. It's something that comes out of you on its own. It's
It, it,
spontaneous.
it's frightening because I know I'm not the only one like this. There are many people like that. Musicians who are just the emotion makes them compose, painters, sculptors, gardeners, florists, all kind of art. But I don't really have control on what I write. It just my brain, my uh, algorithms start to work on me, and I finally find myself I have to submit, and I end up writing. And peculiarly, like when I'm writing a long work, like a novel, I can't wait to come back because I'm writing the next chapter. And I want to know what happened, and I won't know what happened until I write it. It's in my mind, but it's not translated into words yet until I sit down and write it. So I'm eager to read my chapter as I write it because otherwise I don't know what's going to happen. That's very eerie, but that's how my brain works.
Yes, I can relate to that. And there is a there is a name for it, the active imagination. So Carl Jung was someone who coined the term active imagination. So the imagination is active in its own living time, and we can capture that by writing it as it happens. So we see things in our mind once we start writing, or once we start painting, or once we start composing music. So yes, this is very uncanny, as you say,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful. I mean, in a beautiful sense. We also have one more question here by Salim Qureshi. In your experience, do you believe that empathy can be easily taught or learned?
Oh, certainly it can be uh, taught because I think empathy is part of nurture. It's also part of nature because people are inherently good and
Mhm.
they're inherently empathetic and they inherently feel the pain of others and they inherently feel responsible for the pains of others. Um, John Donne in his sermon, he says, "No man is an island entire of himself. Every man is a part of the continent, a piece of the main. Every man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. Therefore, do not send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." And if you have a family that nurtures empathy, it's going to grow. But if you end up being unempathetic, um, you will be an underdeveloped human being because I think that's a big part of our humanity. It's innate and it's part of nurturing because your mother loves you, she breastfeeds you, she changes your diaper, she takes you places, she holds you, you sleep on her chest, and you grow up in a loving place, and you just absorb all of these emotions. I think empathy is part of our psyche.
Right. So we are inherently good unless something
I
wrong happens.
I think we are inherently good, but depending on our programming, we can turn bad. But you think about it in a very simplistic way. An individual is good. It's very hard to hate an individual. It's very
Mhm.
hard to have a horrific conflict with an individual. But if you get 10,000 individuals together as a crowd, then you have a revolution and you have a lot of destruction and horror and pain and war. And we are different when we are in a group because we absorb the group ethos and pathos and become different creatures because I think we have group brains because it's the group power that propelled human beings into dominating the earth. Otherwise, we couldn't run as fast as the gazelle or fly as high as the eagle. But group power made us powerful. So our brains tend to respond to groups differently than to individuals.
Right.
Schiller, the author of Ode to Joy of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, says an individual is a noble person. When he becomes part of a crowd, he becomes a blockhead. These are the words of Schiller, who says, "Joyful, joyful, we adore thee."
That was very wonderfully said and quoted.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saadah. Unfortunately, our time has ended. We look forward to having you with us again in the future, especially during our poetry open mic evenings, which are mornings to you. So it was an absolute pleasure having you with us tonight. And on
Thank,
behalf of everyone in the audience who has written some great comments for you in the chat box, I want to thank you for being here with us tonight.
thank you. Thank you all for letting me be part of your life.
Thank you
Thank
all so much. And Dr. Saadia, have a wonderful day. Everybody
you.
else who is on the other side of the planet, have a wonderful evening. And we hope to see you again in another indelible evening.
Thank you.
So bye
Thank
bye,
you.
everyone. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.